Chapter 1. Arrival at the Hanging Lantern. In a crisp autumn wind rattled the signboard above the narrow lane, swinging the brass letters that read "The Hanging Lantern Inn" with a soft, insistent clatter. Beneath its flickering light, the Gashua Inn's weathered stone walls glowed amber against the gathering dusk. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and hospitality. Though, as I would soon discover, hospitality can be a fragile mask. I stepped inside, adjusting my bowler hat to keep the drizzle at bay. The low-beamed ceiling and heavy oak furniture felt intimate, almost conspiratorial, as if the walls themselves had secrets to whisper. A hearth crackled in the corner, embers dancing like sleeping fireflies. Near it, a stout landlady polished a pewter tankard, her eyes lifting in polite curiosity. "Good evening, monsieur," she greeted in clipped tones, though her tremulous smile suggested a deeper anxiety. I was not expecting visitors so late. "Thank you, madam," I replied, offering my finest Belgian accent with modest flair. "I seek a room for the night, and perhaps a spot of supper." The roads were treacherous. She nodded briskly, steeling herself. "Room's ready. Upstairs, second door on the left. Dinner in 20 minutes, if you please." She bustled away, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and unspoken worry. I seated myself at a corner table, unfolding a crinkled map of the Cotswold region. The inn stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, an apt name for woodlands where light seemed reluctant to venture. Yet tonight the lanterns glowed defiantly, casting high, quivering shadows upon the leaf-strewn floor. Moments later, 2 figures entered, a tall, gaunt gentleman in a charcoal suit, and a younger woman whose cheeks, though pale, bore the faint bloom of youth. They paused by the bar, exchanging hushed words. Their anxiety mirrored the landlady's. For what, I could only guess. I sipped my consommé as servants passed with trays of roast pheasant, buttery potatoes, and honey-glazed carrots. The inn's only other guests, from what I could discern, kept to themselves, exchanging polite but terse nods. A hush hung in the air, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the muted roar of wind beyond the windows. Then, from the staircase, a sudden crash. A lantern toppled from its hook, its glass cracking as it hit the floor. Instinct propelled me to my feet. The landlady hurried forward, lips paling. "1,000 pardons!" she cried, gathering the pieces. "The hook was loose, quite my fault." I waved her concerns aside. No harm done, but might I inspect the stairwell? A loose fitting could pose a danger. She hesitated, then guided me to the narrow stairs. Halfway up, the corridor stretched dimly, walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow our movements. The hook lay abandoned on the sill. The lantern lay shattered, its flame extinguished, yet something more. A dark stain on the polished wood, a smear of crimson half wiped. My heart quickened. Blood, unmistakably fresh. I beckoned her back downstairs. "Madam," I said quietly, "you did not mention any accidents involving blood." Her face drained of colour. "Blood? Monsieur, I scarcely know what you mean." Boom. "Lady and gentleman. There were 2. I stopped her in the hallway, voice firm but gentle. "Did they not ascend moments ago?" She glanced back, startled. "They did. Room 5, but they complained of nothing unusual." I returned to supper, mind racing. The stain called for explanation, accidental injury, or something more sinister. By the time I resumed my seat, even the other guests seemed uneasy. Glances exchanged, voices hushed. The inn's once cosy embrace now felt like a stage set for tragedy. When the landlady appeared again, her hands trembled with a fresh pot for tea. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive me. Perhaps I am overreacting, but—" She swallowed, searching my face. "Do you believe something untoward has occurred here?" I steepled my fingers and regarded her kindly. "Madam, at times the smallest detail betrays the greatest danger. You are wise to heed your instincts." She nodded, relief mingling with newfound resolve. "Shall I alert the constable?" Shook my head. "Not yet. First we must observe, question, and piece together the truth. I beg your patience." As she retreated, I looked once more toward the hearth, its warmth now feeling ironically distant. A guest had been harmed, or worse, and in this quiet inn, nestled on the fringe of a dark wood, a murder might already be in motion. I drew a breath, embracing the stillness before the storm. The game was afoot. Chapter 2. A Chilling Discovery. The pre-dawn mist clung to the narrow lane outside the Hanging Lantern Inn, as though reluctant to reveal its mysteries. From my window at the end of the corridor, I observed the feeble glow of a single lamp, its light trembling against the dew-laden cobblestones. I dressed quietly, mindful of the night's disturbances, and descended the stairs on silent feet. The inn was hushed, only the low murmur of the hearth's dying embers accompanied my steps. In the common room, the landlady sat by the hearth, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes, rimmed with fatigue, lifted at my approach. "Monsieur Poirot." She whispered, voice taut. "I scarcely slept. I fear the worst." I inclined my head, noting the thin scarlet line on her cheek. Nervous agitation, or something more? "Madam, the truth demands we act swiftly. Where are the guests who occupied room 5? She swallowed, rising. "They have not appeared this morning. Their breakfast tray remains untouched." The hush of the inn pressed upon us. I motioned for her to lead the way. At the foot of the stairs, the shattered lantern's fragments still lay by the hook, a silent testament to last night's tremor. I bent to examine the polished wood. The smear of blood, nearly dried, now bore a faint indentation of a boot heel. In room 5, the door stood ajar. Within, the chamber was neat, almost antiseptic. The floral curtains were drawn back to admit the grey light of dawn. On the bedside table, a silver cigarette case lay open, its contents a half-smoked cheroot, hinting at a hurried moment of repose. Yet no sign of life stirred. I closed the door gently and turned to the landlady. "Has anyone else left the building?" She shook her head, distress clouding her features. "No one, monsieur. The other guests still dine at their tables." I signalled to her to fetch a maid and the inn's sole servant, a wiry youth with sallow cheeks. Together we crossed to the stable block at the rear, where the 2 guests' horses had been stabled. Both mounts stood quietly, saddles in place, as if prepared for a journey now indefinitely postponed. The servant's uncertain glance met mine. "They did not feed the horses after supper, monsieur." I thought it odd, but assumed they were departing early. A sense of foreboding tightened my chest. We retraced our steps to the front door, where the grey courtyard lay empty save for a scattering of fallen leaves. I noticed faint footprints in the soft earth, delicate, perhaps a woman's boot, leading toward the half-open servant's entrance. "Show me where those footprints lead," I instructed. Through the narrow doorway, we passed into a low-ceilinged passage, damp with the smell of fresh linen and dust. The footprints ended abruptly at a closed door, marked pantry. I placed my hand on the knob. The latch yielded with a whine. Inside, broken crates and spilled sacks of flour carpeted floor. A splatter of red stained the white powder in the corner. Flour and blood mixed into an ominous paste. The maid gasped, hand to her mouth. "Oh, madam, monsieur, what has happened here?" I knelt, examining the thick stain. This was not the stain from the stairwell. The colour was deeper, more violent. "This room was forced open," I murmured. "Our guests struggled here." My mind raced. Was the landlady's trembling hand responsible for last night's incident? Or had a stranger sought refuge within these walls? "Madam," I said, rising, "I must see every inch of this inn. No corner may hide a clue. Back, in the common room, I paused by the hearth. The embers had flickered out, plunging the room into half-light. The landlady poured tea with trembling hands, her guilt, whether personal or circumstantial, palpable. "Let us speak of the night," I urged gently. "Tell me every detail, however small. Even the faintest memory may illuminate the darkness." As she whispered rushed confessions of creaking floorboards, of muffled voices behind closed doors, I sensed the full weight of the inn's secrets pressing in. Somewhere within these walls, the fate of two travellers lay hidden, and a murderer walked free. With methodical calm, I resolved to piece together the events. The fallen lantern, the blood-stained stair, the bloody pantry floor. Each was but a fragment, a shard of glass waiting to reflect the whole truth. I finished my tea and stood. The landlady's eyes brimmed with tears and relief in equal measure. "I shall not leave this house until justice is served," I declared softly. Outside, the last tendrils of mist lifted, revealing the dark outline of Blackwood Forest. The world awakened to a new day. But for the inhabitants of the Hanging Lantern Inn, daybreak had only deepened the shadow of a terrible crime, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells alight, was ready to confront it. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Shadows. The morning sun filtered through grey clouds as I returned to the common room, where the landlady and her small staff had gathered, beneath the low beams. Their faces were pale, strained by sleepless hours and unspoken fear. The maid hovered by the hearth, clutching a damp cloth, while the wiry servant peered anxiously from the corner. The landlady herself trembled as she poured water into a basin. "Madam," I began, keeping my tone gentle, "I must ask you to remain calm. Your cooperation is invaluable." She nodded, though her hands shook so that the basin rattled against the table. I turned to the servant. "You, my friend, what is your name?" "Edmund, monsieur." "Edmund, tell me of last night. You stabled the horses." He swallowed. "Yes, monsieur, I did, as I always do. But when I returned to the stable to check on them at 10, the door was locked from the inside." "Locked from the inside?" I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "And did you call out?" I rapped monsieur, but there was no answer. I waited, then assumed they were asleep. His voice cracked. I should have insisted. Perhaps, but you are young, and this inn is seldom trouble. He bowed his head. I'm sorry, monsieur. I made a note in my mind. Locked stable door. Silence within. If the guests were inside, why would they lock themselves in? Unless... I tucked the thought away. Next, I addressed the maid, a timid girl named Lucy. Lucy, did you notice anyone enter or leave the inn after supper? She glanced at the landlady, who gave a discreet nod of encouragement. I thought I heard voices in the pantry around midnight. 2 voices, a man's and a woman's, speaking in hurried tones. Can you recall words? I asked, leaning forward. She bit her lip. Only fragments. The man said, We cannot risk discovery. The woman replied, But what choice remains? Then footsteps receded. A clandestine meeting, I murmured. Thank you, Lucy. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as I dismissed her. The landlady poured tea for us all, her hands steadier now that the initial shock had passed. I sipped thoughtfully, eyes on her calm expression. Madam, I said, you know these 2 guests better than anyone. Tell me about their comings and goings. Her lips pressed thin. They called themselves Mr. and Mrs. Glossop, though the woman gave her name as Clara, and the gentleman as Edmund. She hesitated. They arrived 3 days ago, weary from travel. They dined alone, took long walks in the forest, and spent evenings in quiet conversation. I noticed no quarrels, yet something or someone disturbed them last night. She glanced at the pantry door. Perhaps. I heard a crash and came to investigate, but your presence already commanded the situation. I nodded. Precisely. Now show me where they kept their luggage. Madam led me upstairs to the guest corridor. At the end, 2 trunks stood against the wall, one dark leather, one mottled canvas. Their locks were intact, the brass clasps gleaming. I examined the leather trunk's underside. A smudge of crimson, faint but undeniable. The canvas trunk bore fresh scratches as though something or someone had tried to pry it open. I opened the leather trunk. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a porcelain teacup wrapped in cloth, and beneath them a leather-bound journal tied with a ribbon. I lifted the journal, untied the ribbon, and opened to the first page. Clara Glossop, it read, in careful, looping script, October 14th, 1918. The entries that followed spoke of a trip to France, of meetings with a Colonel Hargrave, and an enigmatic reference. All must be settled before we return. My pulse quickened. A clandestine mission, perhaps. No ordinary travellers, but conspirators of some sort. I glanced at the landlady's face. Her lips were pursed. She seemed to weigh each word before speaking. Madam, your inn is remote, yes, but not beyond reach. In these pages lies a motive far greater than random violence. She looked away, tears glinting. They never spoke of any mission, but they asked to keep their affairs private. Understandable. I closed the journal and set it carefully aside. Now we must consider the scene in the pantry. We descended to the lower passage, where pale daylight illuminated the flour and blood. I stooped to inspect the powder's texture. Notice, I said, how the blood was smeared, as though dragged. A wounded person attempted to escape. I traced a thin trail of mixed flour and crimson leading beneath a low shelf. I knelt and peered under. There, half hidden by sacks, was a small leather pouch. I retrieved it. Inside lay a handful of crisp banknotes and a silver locket. The locket opened to reveal 2 miniature portraits, a stern man in military uniform and a young woman whose features matched the Clara of the journal. I stood and regarded the landlady. These were not stolen, at least not entirely. Our victims carried valuables but kept this hidden. Someone sought more. She covered her mouth. My family. My late husband once served with a Colonel Hargrave. They quarrelled over money. Her voice trembled. Perhaps this is connected. Exactly, I said softly. Our guests carried secrets worth killing for. But they also trusted you. So, madam, you are no killer, unless forced by circumstance. I placed the locket in her hands. Keep this safe. As I emerged into the courtyard, the wind rustled through the trees, as though the forest itself whispered warnings. The stain of blood would not wash away, nor would the truth remain hidden. With each clue, the puzzle deepened, and I sensed the next revelation lay just beyond the inn's walls, in the silent hush of Blackwood Forest. The game continued, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells burned ever brighter. Chapter 4. Secrets Beneath the Fallen Leaves. The forest path wound between ancient oaks, whose gnarled branches reached for the sky like arthritic fingers. Dawn's pale light filtered through a canopy of copper and gold, painting the leaf-strewn carpet in muted tones of amber. I walked beside Edmund, the inn's servant-turned-guide, while Madame Dubois followed at a cautious distance. Behind us, Lucy clutched, the locket her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Blackwood Forest was silent save for the gentle whisper of breeze and the distant call of a lone thrush. "Here," I said, pausing at a moss-covered clearing. In the damp earth lay a fragment of leather, perhaps from the glossop's trunk, pressed into the soil. I knelt and traced its torn edge with a gloved finger. Nearby, half hidden by ferns, was a single black button, engraved with a military crest. My heart quickened. The Colonel Hargrave of Clara's journal had worn similar insignia. Edmund swallowed. "Monsieur Poirot, shall I fetch a shovel? We might uncover more." "Patience," I replied. "The forest itself speaks if one listens." I surveyed the surroundings, faint indentations in the soft ground, as though 2 bodies had struggled here. Then, just beyond a cluster of brambles, I spotted a narrow depression in the foliage. "Follow me." We squeezed through the tangle. Not more than 10 paces ahead lay a shallow pit, its dark earth recently turned. I knelt at its edge, trembling with the certainty of what waited below. "Lift this," I instructed Edmund, handing him the small brass spade from his belt. He worked quickly, exposing a tarnished silver cigarette case identical to the one in their room. Beneath it, the glint of a mother-of-pearl handle, part of a riding crop, jutted from the soil. With each shovelful, unease deepened. Then, as the final clods were removed, Lucy stifled a cry. 2 bodies lay entwined, their features frozen in silent horror. Clara Glossop's face was ashen, eyes half open, a smear of blood staining her temple. Beside her, Edmund Glossop's uniform bore the colonel's insignia, A single bullet wound to the chest. The forest floor had claimed its secret. I crouched and examined their hands. Clara's clasped a fragment of parchment. Gently, I pried it free. On it was scrawled a single sentence. He betrayed us. The ink was fresh. Someone had planted it here. Either Clara in her final breath, or their killer staging the scene. Madame Dubois stepped forward, tears glistening on her lashes. My inn, these poor souls. Her voice broke. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Madam, though tragedy has touched you, your courage in assisting me has prevented further deceit. I straightened and addressed Edmund. We must notify the constable at once, but first one more question. Where did they wander last night? He paused, eyes on the lifeless forms. They spoke of returning to the pond at the wood's edge. They said they hoped its stillness would soothe Clara's nerves. He pointed down a narrow deer trail. That way. I nodded and rose to my full height. Then we proceed, but tread carefully. The ground may conceal more evidence. We retraced our steps along the deer trail, pausing where the glossops had lingered. A circle of crushed leaves marked their resting place. There, I spotted a small puddle reflecting the sky, footprints around its rim. Clara's delicate boots and Edmund's heavier soles ringing the mud. I knelt, dipping a handkerchief into the water. Tiny flecks of silver shimmered among the silt, a fine metallic dust. I lifted it carefully. Remnants of freshly minted coins, perhaps from the pouch in the pantry. Someone had forced the contents out here. But why sow the coins before ending their lives? The riddle deepened. A distant bark shattered the stillness. Edmund stiffened. "The constable's hound," he said. "They arrived shortly after dawn. Let us not delay," I replied. We hurried back toward the inn, carrying the evidence, the locket, the journal, the bullet-marked cigarette case, and Clara's final note. The forest closed behind us, restoring its quiet secrets to the shadows. Inside the common room, the constable and his sergeant awaited. Their stern faces betrayed little surprise. Death had a way of infecting even the most serene retreat. I laid out the items in order: the journal, the locket, the cigarette case, and the note. Then, without dramatics, I recounted our findings. Each discovery weaving a narrative of betrayal, desperation, and murder. The constable listened intently, brow furrowed. When I finished, he nodded gravely. "This changes everything. Colonel Hargrave will be arrested at once." I met Madame Dubois' gaze. "Your husband's old comrade will answer for his crimes. But I suspect deeper motives: money, revenge, perhaps even allegiance to a cause unknown." I placed a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "You have done well, child. Your discovery of the locket unlocked the truth." As officers led the bodies away, and the first shafts of sunlight danced across the hearth, I paused before the mantel. The Hanging Lantern Inn, once a haven of warmth, had become a stage for dark passions. Yet through courage and observation, the shadows had been pierced, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells ever so alert, had once more restored order from chaos. Chapter 5. The Colonel's Confession. The midday sun cast sharp patterns of light across the common room as Colonel Hargrave was brought before us, his uniform crisp but stained faintly at the chest. His shoulders were squared, chin lifted, yet his eyes betrayed a conflicted soul. Beside me, Madame Dubois pressed a trembling hand to her lips, while Edmund and Lucy watched with solemn faces. The constable stood at attention, awaiting my signal. I folded my hands behind my back and regarded the man. "Colonel Hargrave," I began, voice calm yet authoritative. "You stand accused of the murders of Mr. and Mrs. Glossop." His jaw tightened, but he nodded once, as if steeling himself. "Before we proceed to formalities, I wish only to understand the reasons behind your actions. Will you speak freely?" He inhaled, exhaling slowly. "Murder, monsieur? I regret their deaths, but—" He paused, gaze flickering to the silver locket on the table. "They forced my hand?" I inclined my head. "Then explain, Colonel. What transgression could justify such violence?" His eyes darkened. "Edmund, Glossop was my protégé in the artillery. I trusted him. He and his wife, Madame Glossop, stole funds allocated for war relief. I discovered their treachery after they returned from France. Funds intended for wounded soldiers, for orphans of battle." A murmur rippled through the room. Madame Dubois gasped. "Soldiers! Orphans!" The colonel continued, voice low. "I confronted them in this very inn's pantry late last night. They denied nothing. Instead, they threatened to expose secrets that would disgrace me, ruin my reputation." He jerked his head toward the pantry door. "They said they had proof of my own embezzlement. Money I diverted to treat a dying comrade. I admit it. I used funds unlawfully, but only to save Dédé's life." His confession hung in the air like a storm cloud. I studied his features, creased with guilt, yet resolute. "So you believed murder preferable to ruin?" I panicked. He whispered, lowering his head. "I never meant to kill Clara. It was Edmund who drew the gun when I demanded the return of stolen funds. There was a scuffle. He closed his eyes. I remember her scream, then a flash, then silence. I paced slowly around the table, fingers steepled. The bullet that killed Edmund passed through his chest, I observed. Yet Clara's wound was to the temple, from a different weapon. How do you account for that?" The colonel's expression flickered. I found Madame Glossop crying by the stable. She pleaded with me not to let her husband suffer the scandal. In a moment of madness I raised my riding crop, the one she held when she first entered your room, and struck her. I saw her fall, and horror seized me. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, Edmund's shoulders slumped, and Madame Dubois let out a strangled sob. The constable stepped forward, gripping the colonel's arm. "Colonel Hargrave, you are under arrest for the murders of Cecil and Clara Glossop." Before the colonel could speak, I placed a hand on the constable's uniform sleeve. "Wait, there remains one detail unexplained." I retrieved the fragment of parchment from my pocket. He betrayed us. This note, found in the pit, was written in fresh ink. Who penned it, Colonel? His face paled. He swallowed. It was my doing. I hoped to divert suspicion toward a third party, someone seeking vengeance. I wrote it in fear, then planted it among their bodies to confuse the investigation. I nodded slowly. Fear can drive even a disciplined officer to desperate acts, yet it also unravels the truth. I turned to Madame Dubois. "Madame, you witnessed the final moments in the pantry. She stepped forward, voice quavering. Yes, I heard harsh words, then a shot. I would have intervened, but fear froze me, in place. Her eyes met mine. I am so sorry for doubting you earlier, Monsieur Poirot. I offered a gentle smile. You acted bravely, madam. Your cooperation aided us greatly. Then, addressing the colonel, I said, Justice must be tempered with mercy. The forces that bring a man to crime are complex. Your act of charity, diverting funds to save a comrade, stemmed from compassion, though it led to fatal choices. He bowed his head. I accept whatever sentence the law decrees, monsieur. The constable removed the colonel's epaulets and secured his wrists. As he was led away, a profound silence settled over the inn. Sunlight danced across the polished floors, illuminating fragments of evidence, journal pages fluttering in a breeze, the silver locket glinting in Lucy's hand. I surveyed the room. Thus concludes our dark chapter, I announced softly. May those who fell find the peace denied to them in life. I looked at each person, landlady, maid, servant, and offered words of comfort. Your courage in adversity honours the memory of the Glossops. Madame Dubois approached, eyes bright with gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough. I inclined my head. It is my duty, madam. Order has been restored, though the scars remain. I gathered my coat and bowler hat. Now I shall take my leave. May the Hanging Lantern Inn shelter only honest travellers henceforth. As I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, I reflected on the fragile line between duty and desperation. In Blackwood's hush, 2 lives were extinguished by fear and betrayal, but through meticulous inquiry, the truth emerged, and Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, remained ready to illuminate the hidden corners of human nature. Chapter 6. Reflections by lamplight night had fallen once more over the Hanging Lantern Inn, its name seeming a darker jest now that murder and betrayal had stained its history. I remained in the common room after supper, the hearth's glow casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Madame Dubois sat beside the dying embers, clutching a cup of herbal tea, while Lucy and Edmund hovered nearby, their faces pale but resolute. The constable had deposited the colonel in the local jail and departed for the station, leaving behind an uneasy hush. I poured myself a small glass of brandy and raised it toward the landlady. Madame, you have borne this night with great fortitude. It is time to find some rest. She managed a wan smile. Merci, Monsieur Poirot. But I feel I cannot sleep. Not until I know no further danger lurks. Then let us speak of brighter things, I suggested gently. Tell me how the inn came to be, for it is more than a mere building. It is the heart of a community. She took a deep breath and began. My grandmother founded the inn a century ago, she said, voice softening. She welcomed travellers from the farthest reaches of England, farmers, soldiers, merchants, even the occasional noble. Through wars, through plagues, she kept the doors open. This place survived because people trusted it. They knew a lamp burned at night and kindness awaited inside. Lucy stepped forward. I work here because I grew up hearing grandmother's stories. I could not bear to see its reputation ruined. Edmund added, and I swore to protect its reputation as well. I should have insisted on entering the stable last night. I shudder to think how close we came to losing more. I nodded thoughtfully. All of you have shown courage. The inn's legacy endures because of your dedication. Yet let us not overlook the lessons of sorrow. I took a sip of brandy, its warmth spreading through me. When people harbour secrets, those truths can fester, especially in isolation. Colonel Hargrave's actions were born of fear of disgrace, fear of losing honour, fear of the unknown consequences of his own compassion. Madame Dubois' eyes glistened. He saved a comrade's life by diverting funds, yet that same act led to ruin and death. It seems a cruel irony. Indeed, I agreed, but human nature is never so simple as black and white. One may commit a crime through mercy or compassion, yet the law measures by outcome, not intent. It is a paradox that plagues justice. Lucy, emboldened, asked, "Monsieur Poirot, do you think the Colonel will find peace in prison?" I regarded her thoughtfully. "Peace is not granted by walls or locks, mademoiselle, but by the reconciliation of one's conscience. If Colonel Hargrave admits his failings and seeks to atone, even within a cell, he may find a measure of serenity." The fire crackled, and I rose to stoke it. As the flames leapt, I pulled from my coat pocket the silver locket and journal. "Before I depart, I have one final task." I handed the locket to Lucy. "Keep this here, where it belongs, within the inn that sheltered your guests. It serves as a reminder that trust and kindness, once betrayed, require vigilance to preserve." Lucy took the locket with reverence. "I will guard it carefully, Monsieur Poirot." I placed the journal on the mantel. "And this, your guests' recorded memories ought to remain, so future travellers remember the cost of hidden sins." Edmund stepped forward. "Monsieur, may I ask a favour? Will you dine here again to restore the inn's reputation?" His voice trembled slightly. "Guests will speak of your presence. Word will spread that the Hanging Lantern Inn welcomes even the greatest of detectives." I smiled, touched by his sincerity. "It would be my pleasure, monsieur. But next time let us hope for simpler mysteries, lost keys or misplaced jewellery, perhaps. Nothing so grave as betrayal and blood." Madame Dubois laughed softly for the first time that evening. "I look forward to it. Simpler mysteries would bring joy back into these halls." As the clock chimed the hour, I gathered my belongings, hat, coat, and the little leather case containing my tools of deduction. The landlady rose to light the lanterns along the corridor, each flame flickering bravely against the night. I paused at the threshold. "Remember," I said, turning back, "the smallest detail can prevent the greatest tragedy. Be vigilant, be kind, and may this inn's light never dim." With that, I stepped into the cool night air. The lanterns, glowing behind me like steadfast sentinels. Outside, the road stretched toward the distant village, dark and silent. I walked beneath a canopy of stars, my mind reflecting on the human heart's capacity for both kindness and betrayal. The game may have ended here, but the lessons of the murder at the Hanging Lantern Inn would linger in my little grey cells, and in the embers of a once again peaceful hearth. Chapter 7. A New Dawn at the Hanging Lantern Inn. A week had passed since the grim events that stained the inn's reputation, yet life at the Hanging Lantern Inn had begun to reclaim its gentle rhythm. Morning light filtered through the mullioned windows, illuminating polished oak tables where new guests, farmers with wicker baskets, a cartographer sketching the forest's edge, and a family of pilgrims bound for the nearby abbey, shared breakfast and quiet conversation. The embers in the hearth glowed softly, and the air held the comforting scents of freshly baked scones and rich coffee. Madame Dubois moved among her patrons with grace restored, offering warm smiles that spoke of renewed confidence. In the corner, by the fireplace, Lucy arranged the guest register, noting names and destinations with her usual careful precision. Though her cheeks still bore a faint pallor from that dreadful midnight, her eyes shone with determination. Each new visitor she welcomed reminded her of the locket tucked away in her apron pocket, a talisman of trust and remembrance. She glanced toward the hallway, where the corridor's lanterns, their polished brass gleaming, stood as silent witnesses to both tragedy and recovery. Edmund busied himself at the stables, grooming horses and repairing saddles. The scars of last week's neglect, a loosened latch, an unlit lantern, had been replaced by a renewed attention to detail. He paused as a young rider arrived, guiding her mount to the water trough and offering gentle advice on securing the bridle. Pride warmed him as he thought of Monsieur Poirot's words. The smallest detail can prevent the greatest tragedy. In every tightened bolt and waxed lantern, Edmund now saw an opportunity to honour that lesson. I arrived at midday, stepping through the front door with the deliberate calm of a man accustomed to unseen perils. Madame Dubois greeted me with a radiant smile, her shawl exchanged for a crisp linen uniform. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone both formal and heartfelt, "it is an honour to host you again." I nodded, setting aside my bowler hat. "Madam, your lantern burns bright, and your hospitality outshines even the darkest shadow." We settled by the hearth for a modest repast, wild mushroom omelettes, crisp bacon, and tea infused with mint from the garden. Conversation flowed easily. Tales of the nearby market town, rumours of foxes sighted at dusk, plans for the autumn festival in the village square. Lucy brought the locket from behind the bar, placing it on the low table between us. Its silver surface caught the firelight, and I asked to see the portraits once more. Clara's gentle smile and the Colonel's stern bearing now felt like echoes of a story concluded, both cautionary and profound. As the afternoon waned, I strolled through the forest path where we had uncovered the bodies. Fallen leaves rustled underfoot, and shafts of sunlight danced between the branches. I paused at the clearing where the button and leather fragment had first revealed treachery. Now, wildflowers had begun to bloom at the edge of the pit, their delicate petals a testament to the earth's resilience. I placed a small offering, a sprig of lavender from the inn's garden, at the clearing's boundary, a silent gesture of respect for the Glossop's departed spirits. Returning to the inn, I found Madame Dubois at the doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of rose and gold. "May this new dawn bring only peace," I said softly. She inclined her head, eyes reflecting hope. "Indeed, monsieur, and should mystery ever darken our door again, we shall face it with vigilance and kindness." I tipped my hat in farewell and stepped onto the lane, the lantern's glow behind me a beacon for weary travellers. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on the fragile bonds of trust and the healing power of light, and I knew that wherever darkness gathered, my little grey cells would be ready to illuminate the truth. Chapter 8. The Parcel from London. Fortnight had passed since I bade farewell to the Hanging Lantern Inn, and I had resumed the tranquil rhythms of London life. My lodgings on Cavendish Place were quiet, the little grey cells content with the hostelries of memory rather than fresh mysteries. Yet one damp morning, as a fine drizzle misted the pavement, a slender parcel arrived, its corners neatly bound. With twine, the address written in a careful hand, I recognized at once. I cut the string and lifted the lid. Inside lay an envelope bearing the seal of the county jail in Blackwood, and beneath it a sheaf of documents, typed ledgers, yellowed correspondence, and a personal letter addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot. My heart stirred. Even behind bars, Colonel Hargrave had contrived one final communication. The letter's pages were penned in a trembling hand. Monsieur Poirot, though I sit in chains, my conscience compels me to reveal the truth in full. The embezzlement you learned of was merely a fragment of a far greater enterprise. An intricate network of war profiteers who used relief funds to line their pockets. I was but a minor actor, shielding many who wield far greater power. Enclosed, you will find ledgers detailing payments to figures of influence. Expose them, and you become not only detective, but crusader. G.H. My eyes swept over the ledgers. Entries dated 1918 through 1920, sums diverted from charitable accounts, names abbreviated by initials, A.C., J.R.E.M., all of them prominent gentlemen of high rank. The correspondence bore imperial letterheads and wax seals, proof that this was no simple coincidence, but a deliberate, wide-reaching conspiracy. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled beneath my chin. The Colonel's confession illuminated the motivation behind his desperation. He had protected comrades, yes, but he also protected men who trafficked in corruption on a grand scale. Had these powerful men feared exposure enough to silence both Colonel and Glossops? It seemed miraculous that fate had intervened so completely. My reverie was broken by a knock at the door. It was Captain Hastings, ever my faithful companion. He carried the Sunday Times under his arm, and one raised eyebrow bespoke his perpetual astonishment. "You look as though you've uncovered a cabinet of secrets, Poirot." I handed him the sheaf of papers. "Indeed, Hastings, our case at the Hanging Lantern Inn was but the surface. Here we have proof of systemic embezzlement and the names of those involved." I tapped the ledger. Colonel Hargrave calls it a network. I suspect he spoke truly. Hastings whistled softly. Good Lord, to think this began with an inn and a fallen lantern. He shuffled through the documents. "Do you intend to publish these?" "Not yet," I replied. "The paper will scarcely print accusations without ironclad proof. We must verify each entry, confirm the identities behind the initials, and ensure any charges are impeccable. A misstep, and the crusade collapses." Hastings nodded gravely. "Then London it is. Shall I fetch the registrar at the Charity Commission?" "Precisely," I said, standing. "We begin at Somerset House, and afterwards perhaps we visit Blackwood again, retrieve the Colonel's original journal entries, and question Madame Dubois and Lucy on any details omitted from his prison letter." He grinned. "To Blackwood, if necessary." And here I thought our adventure concluded with the Colonel's confession. In truth, I reflected, gathering the papers, the new mystery has dawned, one of greed, betrayal, and the exploitation of the innocent. These forged ledgers speak of men who believe themselves untouchable. But justice, when pursued with precision, need fear no power. Captain Hastings tucked the envelope under his arm. "Lead on, Poirot. For the victims of Blackwood and the Yuan, soldiers whose relief was stolen, we shall shine the light." I offered him my arm, feeling the familiar thrill of purpose. Outside the rain had ceased, and a pale sun struggled through the clouds, as though determined to break through darkness. In that moment, I understood that the Hanging Lantern Inn had indeed been more than a backdrop for tragedy. It was the spark igniting a broader crusade. And Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, would not rest until every secret was laid bare. Chapter 9. In the halls of Somerset House, the grand façade of Somerset House rose before us in solemn dignity, its neoclassical columns softened by the afternoon haze. Captain Hastings and I climbed the stone steps beneath the carved royal crest, our footsteps echoing in the vaulted entrance hall. Inside, clerks in sober suits sifted through piles of ledgers and ledgers of correspondence, while the scent of fresh parchment mingled with polished wood and fading ink. Here lay the heart of England's charitable administration, and perhaps the key to unmasking the profiteers. We inquired at the front desk for Mr. Edmund Fletcher, Senior Registrar of the Charity Commission. A polite assistant informed us that Mr. Fletcher would see us at 4 o'clock precisely. Until then, we were welcome to consult public archives in the reading room. I bowed my head in thanks. "Let us begin, Hastings," I said, guiding him through the labyrinth of corridors. The reading room was a cathedral of knowledge. Tall windows, rows of oak desks, wrought iron lamps casting pools of light on open books. A hush prevailed, broken only by careful rustling of pages. I laid Colonel Hargrave's ledgers on the table, splayed open at the entries dated July 1919. The sums deflected into accounts under initials AC, JR, and EM Hastings, and I examined each line. Date, amount, purpose, recipient. The handwriting was immaculate, likely the Colonel's own annotations. "Here," I murmured, pointing to the initials AC beside a payment of $200 labelled medical supplies. That could refer to Arthur Carrington, the MP known for his wartime hospital advocacy. Hastings made a note. JR might be Sir John Redcliffe, chairman of the War Relief Fund. He traced another entry. EM, Edwin Montgomery, Lord High Steward. Each name corresponded to a figure of stature. Exposure would rock the establishment. At precisely 4, the assistant announced Mr. Fletcher's arrival. He entered briskly, papers in hand and spectacles perched on his nose. After brief introductions, he seated himself behind a desk strewn with official filings. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, how may the Commission assist you?" I leaned forward, voice measured. "Mr. Fletcher, I possess ledgers indicating funds diverted from relief charities to private accounts belonging to prominent individuals. I require access to original correspondence and disbursement records for verification." His expression remained courteous, but guarded. "Such allegations are grave," he replied. "The Commission's files are confidential, accessible only upon formal request. However, if you submit a petition, I can expedite review." I bowed. "Very well. In the interim, might you grant us inspection of the sealed envelopes corresponding to these disbursement dates?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Under supervision, you may view them here in the archivist's office." We followed him to the archivist's chamber, a smaller suite lined with locked cabinets. The archivist, a quiet gentleman named Mr. Pemberton, produced a key ring of brass skeleton keys. As he unlocked each drawer, I observed his careful precision. The first envelope bore the seal of Lord Redcliffe. I broke it gently, revealing a letter of recommendation for a medical supplier, the signature of J.R., and a note penciled in the margin, "Urgent, release funds." The dates matched our ledger, yet the recipient was an unregistered firm called Halford & Co., a phantom business. Further documents confirmed the pattern. Payments authorized to shell companies, invoices forged to disguise redirection. Each recipient was a front for individual profiteers. As I catalogued these revelations, Hastings frowned. "Poirot, look at this." He handed me a memorandum stamped private and signed simply AC. It read, "Ensure no queries from the Commission. I will handle the registrar discreetly." The implication was clear. Someone on the inside had been bribed or coerced to obstruct scrutiny. He closed the envelope and regarded Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, did you ever receive hospitality or gifts from any of these parties?" His face reddened slightly. I have attended dinners hosted by Lord Redcliffe, but only as a courtesy. No improper exchanges occurred." Yet his uneasy glance suggested otherwise. I turned to Hastings. "We must obtain Fletcher's expense records, as well as his correspondence with these gentlemen." Fletcher exhaled. "I see you will pursue this relentlessly, Monsieur Poirot. Very well. I shall provide the necessary files under seal. You may return tomorrow morning." We thanked him and departed into the dusk-lit courtyard. As we walked back to Cavendish Place, the city lights began to glow like distant lanterns. I tucked the newly acquired documents beneath my arm. "The web is wider than even Colonel Hargrave feared," I said, "and the danger extends into these very corridors of power." Hastings nodded grimly. "We have kindled a flame that may illuminate even the darkest secrets." I smiled, though my mind whirled with possibilities. "Tomorrow we dive deeper. For every forged ledger there lies a man who must answer for his misdeeds. And Hercule Poirot's little grey cells will not rest until justice prevails." Chapter 10. Threads of Conspiracy. A pale November dawn found us at Somerset House once more, the air crisp and the sky a vault of slate. Captain Hastings and I ascended the grand staircase in silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts. In my satchel lay the expense ledgers and correspondence promised by Mr. Fletcher, files that I suspected would reveal how deep the rot had spread. We entered the archivist's chamber, where Mr. Pemberton awaited, a neatly stacked pile of folders on his desk. His expression was deferential, but I detected a flicker of unease as he watched our arrival. I dismissed formalities and opened the first folder, Mr. Fletcher's personal account book, annotated with ledger entries for dinners, theatre tickets, and engraved silver, a pattern of hospitality that mapped neatly onto the dates of the charity payments. "Hastings," I murmured, "observe how every disbursement to the phantom firm coincides with a lavish entertainment expense." Hastings peered over my shoulder. "Redcliffe's name appears on the invitations, and here is Lord Montgomery's crest embossed on the menu." I tapped the page. The registrar was not merely polite, he was indebted. Next, I produced the memoranda marked private and urgent. I read aloud a passage. Ensure the Commission's inquiries are diverted. Release the registrar from scrutiny. Hastings's face darkened. Who penned this? I traced the signature loop. AC, surely Arthur Carrington, the tireless campaigner for military hospitals. I slid the paper across to Mr. Pemberton. Tell me, sir, did you witness the arrival of letters addressed in this hand? He swallowed, adjusting his spectacles. Yes. I delivered a sealed envelope directly to Mr. Fletcher's office on 2 occasions. His voice quavered. But I thought them routine. I inclined my head. Routine for a bribed man, perhaps? I replaced the papers carefully. We shall need a full transcript of your delivery records, Mr. Pemberton. He nodded, pale. It will be ready by midday. We rose to depart. As I closed the door behind us, Hastings whispered, Poirot, we have the registrar and 2 benefactors implicated. Who next? I smiled thinly. The web tightens, mon ami. There remains a 3rd figure whose initials match EM, Edwin Montgomery, but his ledger entries suggest a payment under another coded reference. AE. A misdirection meant to evade detection. Back in the reading room, we cross-referenced Montgomery's parliamentary diary. Accessible in a leather-bound volume, Hastings located the sessions in which Lord Montgomery addressed relief committees. Here, too, he issued directives that bypassed normal channels. He instructed the Commission to fast-track Halford & Co.'s claims. Hastings observed, even vouched for their integrity in public. I tapped the page. A public veneer to conceal private gain. Now, Hastings, we must secure a witness. Fletcher's assistant, one Miss Clarissa Blythe. She typed the Commission's forms and no doubt recognized irregularities. We hurried to the Commission's clerical offices, where rows of typewriters clattered. Miss Blythe, a young woman with keen eyes and a measured composure, looked startled at the sight of my visiting card. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, voice steady. Mr. Fletcher told me you would come. She led us to a side room, closing the door behind her. I noticed discrepancies, she began. Invoices for Halford & Co. arrived without supporting documentation. No delivery notes, no receipts. I queried Mr. Fletcher, but he silenced me with a warning. Her gaze flicked to Hastings. He said I should trust my superiors. I nodded. Yet trust misplaced is the catalyst for betrayal. Miss Blythe, would you be willing to testify to these warnings and supply any discarded drafts you preserved? She nodded firmly. I kept my notes. Here they are. She handed me a sheaf of typewritten pages with margin annotations. I scanned them. Misspelled firm names, corrected payment amounts, and a note in Fletcher's hand. Destroy draft. A critical testament to his knowledge and complicity. As afternoon shadows lengthened, I gathered our evidence. We have Fletcher's expenses, Carrington's private directives, Montgomery's public endorsements, and now Miss Blythe's witness account. Tomorrow we press our case before the Commission's board. Hastings exhaled. It seems we have rallied every thread. I smiled confident. Indeed, when every strand converges, the tapestry of truth is revealed. We left Somerset House, our steps light with purpose. Outside, the city hummed with life, but beneath its civilized veneer lay agendas and avarice. and Hercule Poirot, tenacious as ever, would unmask them all. Chapter 11. Exposé at the Commission. The boardroom at Somerset House was colder and more severe than any courtroom I had known. High-backed leather chairs encircled a vast mahogany table, and overhead crystal chandeliers cast an austere light upon the polished surfaces. At the head sat Lord Pembroke, the Commission's chairman, his pince-nez glinting as he regarded Captain Hastings and me with polite curiosity. Around him clustered the senior commissioners, stern gentlemen in black coats and starched collars, their expressions courteous but guarded. I stepped forward, bowler hat in hand, and offered my greeting. "My lords, gentlemen of the board, I thank you for granting me this audience. I come to lay before you evidence of grave misconduct within your ranks, a conspiracy that has embezzled charitable funds and betrayed the very soldiers and widows we seek to aid." Lord Pembroke inclined his head. "Proceed, Monsieur Poirot." I motioned to Hastings, who placed before the commissioners a neat stack of documents, ledgers, expense records, witness statements, and sealed correspondence. "First," I said, "we have the charity ledgers belonging to Colonel Hargrave, revealing payments diverted to a firm called Halford and Cobooms, a phantom entity used to conceal illicit profits." I tapped the top ledger. "These entries correspond exactly to lavish entertainments hosted for Mr. Edmund Fletcher, your senior registrar." Murmurs rippled through the room. I continued. "Second, we present Mr. Fletcher's own account book, documenting dinners, theatre outings, and silver engravings, all settled by the very individuals whose initials appear in our ledgers: A.C. for Arthur Carrington, J.R. for Sir John Redcliffe, and E.M. for Lord Edwin Montgomery." Commissioner Marwood's lips thinned at the mention of names. I observed the tension enfold the room like a tightening noose. "Third," I said, "we have testimony from Miss Clarissa Blythe, Mr. Fletcher's assistant, who noted irregular invoices, lack of receipts, and direct instructions to destroy draft documents that would have exposed the scam." I laid Miss Blythe's annotated drafts before them, watching as Bishop Clark reached out a hand to examine the margin notes in Fletcher's handwriting. "Destroy draft, no exceptions. Finally," I concluded, "we offer private memoranda, penned by Mr. Carrington, instructing your registrar to deflect any inquiry from this commission, and letters from Lord Montgomery vouching publicly for Halford and Co., all while pocketing funds meant for war relief." Hastings stood by my side, ready to answer any question. A hush fell, broken only by the ticking of a gilded clock. Lord Pembroke rose and cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, your evidence is to me incontrovertible and deeply troubling. Yet the gravity of these allegations demands due process. We will form a special committee to investigate each individual named here. In the meantime, Mr. Fletcher is suspended from his duties, and these documents shall remain under seal." Chitty-up-see. Commissioners exchanged solemn glances. Commissioner Grant, whose family had long supported the commission, pressed his lips together. "Does your investigation extend beyond these names? Are there other parties implicated?" I inclined my head. The ledger entries span from 1918 through 1920. It is likely more names will surface as correspondence is unsealed. I recommend your committee consider a full audit of relief fund disbursements during that period. Lord Pembroke tapped his gavel lightly. So ordered. He turned to the Commission Secretary. Prepare the formal charges and assemble the committee. Notify Sir John Redcliffe and Lord Montgomery that they are under scrutiny. We shall convene within the fortnight. As the boardroom emptied, Hastings and I lingered. The chairman approached. Monsieur Poirot, your diligence honours our cause. You have saved this institution from greater disgrace. He offered an uncharacteristically warm smile. We are indebted to you. I inclined my head respectfully. Justice is the light that no darkness can withstand, my lord. It has been my privilege to serve. Outside, the autumn wind stirred fallen leaves across the courtyard. Captain Hastings sighed. Well, Poirot, you've done it again. You've laid bare a conspiracy that reaches to the highest echelons. I adjusted my waistcoat, eyes gleaming. It is but the beginning, Hastings. Truth, once uncovered, demands its due. Now we wait for the committee's report, and the voices of those powerful men when called to account. He grinned. And when they protest their innocence, I tapped my temple. Then, mon ami, we allow their own words and deeds, their ledgers, letters, and excuses, to indict them. In time, every piece will fall into place. As we descended the marble steps of Somerset House, the dusk sky reddened behind us. The lamps along the riverbank flickered on, reflecting in the Thames, like a string of lanterns guiding us onward. And so the grand machinery of justice began to turn, set in motion by a Belgian detective's little grey cells and an unyielding faith in the power of truth. Chapter 12. Echoes through Parliament. Spring had barely begun when the fallout from the Charity Commission's exposé reached the hushed chambers of the House of Commons. I attended the session incognito, seated among crowded benches where murmured conversations swirled like restless currents. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, illuminating the polished oak desks and lending gravity to the moment. Before me, Captain Hastings, disguised beneath a simple bowler hat and dark coat, scanned the assembly with keen interest. At precisely 3 o'clock, the chamber fell silent as Speaker Mellish rapped his gavel. Order! The honourable member for Cheltenham has the floor. Sir John Redcliffe rose, his usually unflappable composure strained. His voice, measured at first, quavered when he addressed the accusations. Gentlemen, recent revelations concerning Halford & Co. and alleged disbursements from war relief funds are deeply unsettling. I categorically deny any wrongful conduct. My public support for these measures was motivated solely by the welfare of our returning soldiers. A ripple of whispers followed him as he returned to his seat. Moments later, Lord Edwin Montgomery, his title won't shield him here, rose on a point of privilege. Mr. Speaker, I too protest any suggestion of impropriety. The endorsement of Halford & Co., although perhaps ill-advised, was intended to expedite life-saving supplies. I stand accused without proof of personal gain. Eyes turned towards the opposition benches as Arthur Carrington strode forward, white-knuckled but determined. If intention alone could absolve wrongdoing, then laws themselves would be meaningless. The documents presented demonstrate a clear flow of funds diverted into private entertainment and personal accounts. I implore the House to await the Charity Commission's formal report before impugning motive, but let us not mistake urgency for innocence. As Carrington spoke, I observed the subtle shifts in posture among other members. Some furtively leafed through their own notes, others forbore outright glances. The air crackled with tension. I leaned to Hastings. Note how Carrington champions due process, yet his own memorandum withheld critical information from the Commission. Hastings nodded. His rhetorical flourish cannot erase the paper trail. We exchanged a discreet nod. Then Speaker Mellish rose again. The House will adjourn for a brief recess to receive a preliminary statement from the Charity Commission's Special Committee. Murmurs swelled with anticipatory excitement. In the corridor outside, officials hurried in waistcoats and gowns, bearing the committee's report. We followed the stream of MPs back into the chamber as Emily Thorne, Senior Commissioner, stepped to the lectern. Her voice rang clear. Esteemed members, our investigation has revealed compelling evidence of embezzlement within the relief fund disbursements of 1918 to 1920. We find Sir John Redcliffe, Lord Edwin Montgomery, and Mr. Arthur Carrington each authorised payments to Halford & Co., which operated as a shell corporation. Furthermore, we have documentary proof that Mr. Edmund Fletcher received gifts and hospitality directly tied to these fraudulent payments. A hush descended. Thorne continued, In light of these findings, we recommend the suspension of all involved members pending criminal inquiry. We have forwarded our dossier to His Majesty's Attorney General. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It is with solemn duty that we restore public confidence in charitable institutions. The chamber erupted into cries of protest, indignation, and support in equal measure. Chairs scraped, voices clashed, and hastily scribbled motions proliferated. I maintained my composure as Hastings whispered, "This will shake the foundations of privilege." Back in the lobby after adjournment, Sir John Redcliffe confronted me, having recognised my outline. "Monsieur Poirot, you seem ever present at society's darkest thresholds. Do you take satisfaction in our downfall?" Kirsutia lips curled defensively. I met his gaze calmly. "Justice, sir, does not seek to destroy, but to correct. When charity is corrupted, the innocent suffer. My duty is to illuminate the truth, that wrongs may be righted." Redcliffe's eyes flickered with reluctant respect. "Will the House forgive our lapses in time?" I inclined my head. "Only if your subsequent actions prove contrition. Words are fleeting, deeds endure." He paused, then offered a curt nod before melting into the milling crowd. Hastings joined me, a wry smile on his face. "I dare say, Poirot, few detectives can boast such reach, from a remote inn to the halls of power." I placed a hand on his shoulder. The Hanging Lantern Inn may seem worlds away, but human nature remains the same everywhere, susceptible to fear, temptation, greed. Our little grey cells have spanned both realms, and I trust they will prevail. As we exited Westminster, the late afternoon light glinted on the Thames, the water flowing steadily past Parliament's silhouette. In that endless current, I discerned the promise of renewal, that even when venerable institutions falter, the relentless pursuit of truth can mend the fabric of society, and with justice illumined by unwavering vigilance, the world, in all its grand halls and humble inns, stands a little more secure against the shadows. Chapter 13. Shadows over the estate a week had passed since the tumult in Parliament, and London's pulse beat once more with its familiar cadence. Yet for Hercule Poirot, tranquillity proved elusive. The dispatch from His Majesty's Attorney General lay on his mahogany desk, indictments prepared, warrants signed, and instructions to travel to Gloucestershire to oversee the arrest of Sir John Redcliffe at his country estate. The matter called for discretion and precision, qualities Monsieur Poirot prized above all. Mid-morning found me aboard the 10:15 express to Cheltenham, the misted countryside gliding past the carriage windows like a muted landscape painting. By midday, Captain Hastings and I alighted at the small station and engaged a pair of constables to guide our approach. The air smelled of damp earth and clipped hedges, a bracing contrast to Westminster's dusty corridors. I adjusted my bowler, hat, and surveyed the road leading up to Ashcombe Manor, its wrought-iron gate standing ajar as if in cautious welcome. 16 carriages of the Redcliffe household lined the gravel drive, but none bore the crimson seal of an imminent arrest. I motioned to Hastings. "Observe the servants' faces, Hastings. Watch for tremors in their gait, fleeting glances, signs of unease." He nodded, squinting at a footman whose eyes darted suspiciously before settling on the approaching constables. Inside the manor, oak-panelled walls and portrait-lined corridors whispered of lineage and long-held privilege. We were ushered into the drawing-room, where Lady Redcliffe sat by a window, her composure regal yet strained. Opposite her reclined Sir John in a leather armchair, elbows on the chair's arms, chin cupped in his hands. His eyes, so strong in the House of Commons, now lacked their customary fire. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, voice measured but devoid of its former confidence. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He allowed Hastings and me to enter without protest. The constables, pausing in the vestibule, I inclined my head. "Sir John, I regret that duty summons me under less felicitous circumstances. You stand charged with embezzlement of charitable funds, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The Attorney General's warrant awaits your signature." Sir John's bare lips tightened. Lady Redcliffe rose, her silk skirts whispering against the carpet. "Surely this can be settled quietly," she interjected. "My husband's reputation—" "Reputation, madam," I replied gently, "must be underpinned by integrity. When public trust is betrayed, no distance from Westminster can atone without due process." I turned to the butler. "Mr. Graham, please produce Sir John's papers." The butler retreated, returning with a red leather folio stamped with the royal seal. Sir John accepted it, his hand trembling ever so slightly as he signed the warrant. The constables stepped forward. "Sir John Redcliffe, you are under arrest in the King's name." He rose, shoulders squared, and allowed himself to be bound with military precision. As the officers led him away, Lady Redcliffe collapsed into an armchair, eyes wide with shock. I offered her my armchair opposite and poured her a glass of lemon water. "Madam, I understand the pain of public disgrace, but your husband's cooperation now may spare further scandal. In time truth laid bare can also heal." She bowed her head, tears slipping unheeded. I will see this through, Monsieur Poirot." Outside, Hastings joined me on the terrace, the late afternoon sun gilding the manicured lawns. "Well, Poirot," he said, "another chapter closed. Yet I sense our work is not yet done." I nodded, gazing towards the distant peaks of the Cotswolds. You are correct, Hastings. Lord Montgomery's trial awaits, and Mr. Carrington has yet to answer for his part. But Ashcombe Manor will remember this day, the day privilege bowed to justice. I paused. We must also revisit Blackwood Forest. There remains the matter of the Glossop's kin, and Lady Dubois of the Hanging Lantern Inn may yet require our counsel. Hastings smiled. A return to old haunts. How refreshing! We walked down the gravel path together, our footsteps the only sound amid whispering beeches. Later, at the station, I purchased 2 journals for note-taking, and returned Hastings's gaze. Monsieur Poirot, do you ever tire of the chase? He asked with mock solemnity. I tapped my temple. Mon ami, the hunt nourishes the mind. As long as there are secrets worth untangling, my little grey cells shall never rest. The whistle of the returning train pierced the air. We boarded, settling into our compartment as the engine shuddered into motion. The rolling fields gave way to woodland once more, and I closed my eyes, recalling the lantern's flicker in Madame Dubois' inn. The path ahead might be long, but with determination, patience, and method, justice would follow. And so, beneath the vaulted sky of early spring, Hercule Poirot journeyed onward, ready to illuminate yet more shadows with the unerring light of truth. Chapter 14. Revelation among the Ruins. The first chill of April lingered in the dawn air as I stepped from the carriage onto the misted path leading into Blackwood Forest. The road, once familiar, now carried the echoes of tragedy and justice, a winding ribbon between the courts of power and the humble innocence of an inn's hearth. Captain Hastings stood beside me, cloak drawn tight, surveying the trees whose branches still bore last season's skeletons. We returned to the scene of our first discovery, I observed, breathing in the damp scent of pine and loam. There remains one detail unsettled, the identity of the letter-writer who tormented Colonel Hargrave in his final moments. Hastings nodded. Madame Dubois will be relieved to see you again. Beyond the ivy-clad walls of the Hanging Lantern Inn, the landlady herself awaited us on the threshold, her countenance composed yet relieved. Lucy and Edmund joined her, offering warm smiles that belied the gravity of our visit. The inn, though refurbished and brightened, held its scars in the settle bench by the hearth, and the lanterns whose glass had been replaced but not forgotten. After cordial greetings, we gathered in the common room. I produced the folded fragment of parchment. The jagged edge bore the final words, "He betrayed us." Madame Dubois, I began, I have returned to learn whether any guest, before the Glossop's arrival, might have taken solace in your pantry or rear passages. Someone familiar with its layout could craft such a note and plant it among the bodies. She frowned, thinking. Only one stranger came through these doors in the days before. A travelling agent for the War Widows' Fund, a Mr. Caldwell. He inquired after Colonel Hargrave's reputation and asked for permission to meet him privately. Edmund, who had rested on the settle, spoke up. I remember him distinctly. Tall, silver-haired, polite. He left hurriedly when told the colonel had gone riding. Lucy nodded. He mentioned a secret matter. He would return later, but he never did. A spark of recognition lit within me. I dismissed the maid to bring pen and ink, and invited Madame Dubois to describe Caldwell's features in her journal. Then I questioned Edmund on the agent's manner of dress and voice. His description matched a photograph I recalled from the commission's file. Caldwell was, in fact, an intermediary for a clandestine collective seeking to expose profiteers, by any means, honourable or otherwise. "We have our culprit," I announced. Mr. Caldwell, acting as legal avenger, penned the note to suggest a third party. His hope was to muddy the waters, making both Colonel and Glossop's victims of a hidden hand, and thereby ignite a broader scandal. When the Colonel died and the bodies were discovered, Caldwell's ploy dissolved into nothing but suspicion. Hastings whistled. "A dangerous zealot, no matter his cause." I nodded. His methods lacked compassion for innocent life. As light crept into the lantern-lit room, Madame Dubois retrieved her account book. She had recorded Caldwell's visit and retained his visiting card. We compared his card to the official directories, confirming his complicity. "Shall we involve the constable?" she asked. I tapped my cane thoughtfully. "Yes, but let us give Caldwell a chance to speak. Under questioning, he may admit his motives." I rose and strode to the front door, Hastings and the constable close behind. Outside, the forest murmured with the promise of spring. I called Mr. Caldwell's name in a firm voice. After a moment, a shadow detached from the trees, grey hair glinting in morning light. He approached with hesitant dignity. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, voice low, "I see you have discovered my letter." I inclined my head. "You wish to avenge the stolen funds and punish the conspirators. But you forgot that innocent. Lives hung by the same thread." His shoulders sagged. "I did not foresee their deaths. I swore only to unmask corruption." I studied him kindly. "You unleashed more harm than truth, that you regret. Yet your confession will spare further suffering." He bowed his head. "Arrest me, then. I accept the consequences." The constable stepped forward to take him into custody for questioning at Cheltenham Station. Returning to the inn, we found the staff gathered, breath held in anxious anticipation. Madame Dubois embraced Lucy and Edmund. "Our home is safe. Again!" she exclaimed. I patted her hand. "The Hanging Lantern Inn stands purified by your courage and compassion. May its light continue to welcome honest travellers." As I mounted the carriage with Hastings, the inn's lanterns flickered farewell. The forest path receded into mist, but in my mind the full tapestry of motive and action lay revealed. With every secret laid bare, from pantry walls to marble halls, the pursuit of justice proved as essential in humble inns as in gilded chambers. And with that, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells could rest, until the next shadow dared to stir. Chapter 15. Dawn of a New Chapter. The first light of morning filtered through the tall windows of the Hanging Lantern Inn, gilding the polished oak tables and casting a soft glow upon the hearth where embers still lingered. Madame Dubois moved quietly among her staff, inspecting the freshly cut flowers in the vases and adjusting the lace curtains to admit the sun's warmth. A gentle peace had settled over the inn, as though the tragedies and intrigues of the past weeks were but a distant dream. I rose from my corner armchair, where I had sat sipping my early tea, and stretched. Captain Hastings joined me by the window, peering out at the dew-kissed lawn, where Lucy and Edmund tended to the stables. The air carried the faint bray of horses and the sweet promise of spring's renewal. "Look at them," Hastings observed, with a smile. "One would never guess the horrors that once unfolded here." I nodded, keeping my gaze fixed on the pair. "Life resumes its course, Hastings. The lanterns still burn, and kind hearts prevail." Madame Dubois approached, her expression serene. She placed a delicate porcelain cup before me. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "words cannot express our gratitude. You have restored not only justice, but our hope." I inclined my head graciously. "Madam, it is your courage that gave truth a place to flourish. Without your willingness to face fear, none of this would have been possible." She turned to her staff. "Lucy, Edmund, prepare breakfast for our guest." As they hurried off, she took my hand. "Promise me you will visit again, Monsieur Poirot. This inn needs its little grey cells." I allowed myself a faint chuckle. "I shall return, madam, though I trust my next visit will involve misplaced spectacles rather than murder." She laughed, the sound gentle and bright. "Then our hopes are high indeed." She stepped back, attending to the tasks that marked the morning's routine. Hastings and I made our way to the courtyard, where the horses stood patiently. I patted the mane of a dappled mare and inhaled the fresh air. "Now," Hastings said, turning to him with a thoughtful expression, "we have unwound the threads from Colonel Hargrave's betrayal all the way to Parliament's floor. Only one detail remains: the fate of the War Relief Fund itself." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You think the Commission will enact reforms?" I tapped my temple. "Indeed. The uproar has emboldened honest officials. I predict a public inquiry will follow, leading to stricter oversight and transparency. The soldiers and widows who suffered shall find their dues restored, piece by piece." Carriage clattered up the drive, bearing a messenger in the Commission's livery. Madame Dubois intercepted him, returning moments later with a sealed missive. She handed it to me. I peeled back the wax and read the succinct dispatch. The Charity Commission, acting on Poirot's evidence and the Commission's investigations, had recovered a substantial portion of the misappropriated funds and initiated legal action to reclaim the remainder. The press would soon herald the news, restoring faith in the system. I folded the letter, offering a satisfied nod. "See, Hastings, justice not only punishes, but repairs." He grinned. "Well said, mon ami." Just then, Lucy emerged from the stables, wiping her hands on her apron. She approached with a hesitant smile and handed me a small packet wrapped in brown paper. "Monsieur Poirot, this arrived by courier last night. No sender's name." I untied the string, revealing a first edition of Voltaire's Candide, its pages edged in gold. Inside lay a slip of paper inscribed in a careful hand. "For illumination in dark times, may reason and wit guide you onward. A grateful friend." Warmth spread through me at the thoughtful gift. I glanced at Madame Dubois, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It seems kindness blooms here as readily as justice," I murmured. Hastings clapped me on the back. "A fine chapter's end, Poirot." I pocketed Candide, considering the centuries-old lessons it contained. "Indeed, Hastings, and yet stories never truly end. Each dawn brings new mysteries, new calls for our little grey cells." Madame Dubois stepped forward, lantern in hand. May your path be ever illuminated, Monsieur Poirot. I raised my hat. And may yours shine ever bright, madam. As I mounted my carriage alongside Hastings, the inn's silhouette receded into the morning haze. The winding road ahead led back to London, to new puzzles and fresh challenges. Behind us, the Hanging Lantern Inn stood steadfast, a beacon of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of truth. And with that, Hercule Poirot journeyed onward, guided by reason, wit, and the perpetual promise of tomorrow's dawn. Chapter 16. A Letter from the Field. The carriage rumbled through the grey spring morning as Captain Hastings and I journeyed back to London, the polished panels of the compartment reflecting our thoughtful faces. Outside, hedgerows blossomed into riotous displays of white and pink, the world seemingly eager to shrug off winter's lethargy. Yet within my mind, the echo of Blackwood's lantern-lit halls still glowed warmly. The Hanging Lantern Inn had reclaimed its innocence, its lanterns once again signals of refuge rather than dread. Hastings broke the silence. A fine conclusion to the Hargrave affair, wouldn't you say, Poirot? Funds restored, conspirators unmasked, an agent of vigilante justice brought to heel. He smiled, leaning back against the velvet cushion. Still, your little grey cells must be thirsting for their next sustenance. I inclined my head, fingers tapping a gentle rhythm on the armrest. Indeed, Hastings, the mind may rest only briefly before curiosity demands fresh puzzles. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment of reverie. The soft crackle of the hearth, Lucy's determined gaze, the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. A gesture from Madame Dubois had conveyed more gratitude than any formal commendation. Our return to Cavendish Place was uneventful, the city awakening to another day of commerce and commotion. As the carriage drew up before my lodgings, the landlady gave a knowing nod. I paid the driver and stepped onto the pavement, Hastings at my side. The door opened before I could knock, and my maid, Mrs. Pott, handed me a single envelope sealed in green wax. "Good day, monsieur," she said. "This arrived for you, postmarked Ardley Vale." Her tone suggested both curiosity and caution. Ardley Vale lay nearly 50 miles north, a remote village known for its military hospital during the war. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Hastings peered over my shoulder. The script was spidery but precise. "Monsieur Poirot, I write in desperate hope that you may aid me. My name is Nurse Evelyn Murdoch, formerly of the Red Cross Hospital in Ardley Vale. Among the records recently transferred to the Commission, certain patient files are missing. Files that concern a young soldier, Private Thomas Carroway, discharged under unusual circumstances. His subsequent fate remains unknown. Rumour speaks of a scandal quelled by powerful interests, but no proof survives. If you could spare a moment, please visit Ardley Vale. The truth may yet be recovered. I remain a humble servant of justice. Evelyn Murdoch." I refolded the paper and handed it to Hastings. "Read that, mon ami." He scanned the text and whistled softly. Carroway. The name doesn't ring a bell, but missing files in a war hospital could implicate another cover-up. My mind stirred with possibilities. The Soldiers' Relief Fund had been the first thread. Now, patient records vanished under opaque circumstances. "Hastings, we must travel to Ardley Vale without delay. Nurse Murdoch's appeal may reveal that Colonel Hargrave's network was but one cell in a larger organism of corruption. He snapped the letter shut. Shall I prepare my things? I nodded. Yes, and alert Mrs. Pott to pack essentials. He departed, already moving with the energy of a new adventure. I lingered at the window, gazing down the street where vendors arranged their wares. The city bore no trace of last week's parliamentary uproar. Life resumed its masquerade of normality. Yet beneath that veneer, secrets still festered. Later, as I settled at my writing desk, I drafted a brief response to Nurse Murdoch, assuring her of my forthcoming visit and requesting any preliminary documents she could supply. The dusk deepened outside, and the gaslight flickered in sympathy with my anticipation. Even as the city's clatter faded into night, a quieter excitement took hold within me. I rose to replenish my brandy glass, recalling a maxim I often repeated: when one door closes, another opens in the mind. Ardley Vale might lie too, carriages away, but the journey I foresaw would traverse the corridors of power and the wards of a war hospital alike. Courage, betrayal, compassion, and greed, the familiar companions of every human story, awaited fresh roles in this next chapter. Footsteps approached the door. Hastings entered, suitcase in hand, eyes bright. "Ready, Poirot?" I offered him my arm. "Ready, Hastings. Tomorrow we board the early train. Tonight we prepare our little grey cells for another case where justice demands its due." He grinned, and together we stepped out into the lamp-lit hallway, leaving behind the comforts of home for the uncertainties of the road. Beyond the window, London's skyline shimmered against the star-spotted sky, a silent promise that wherever darkness gathered and wherever secrets lay hidden, Hercule Poirot would be there to bring them into the light. Chapter 17. Shadows in the hospital ward. The first train of the morning carried us northward through rolling hills veiled in mist, the carriages rattling like distant thunder. Captain Hastings and I sat opposite each other, Nurse Murdoch's letter folded on the seat between us. Outside, elm and beech trees flickered past, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and early blooms. Ardley Vale Station, when it appeared, was little more than a single platform, a waiting room, and a cluster of smoking chimneys, its innocence belying the secrets within. We disembarked and found Nurse Evelyn Murdoch waiting on the platform, her dark uniform and cap pristine, despite the dawn chill. She bowed with measured relief. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming so swiftly." Her voice was calm, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. I offered my hand. "Madam, your letter spoke of urgency. Please guide us to the hospital." She led us along a narrow lane lined with whitewashed cottages and small gardens, until the stone facade of Ardley Vale Military Hospital came into view. It was an austere building, its tall windows barred with iron, its walls pocked by age and damp. Hastings and I exchanged glances. Inside, the ward corridors smelled of antiseptic and pine polish. Murdoch paused before a heavy, numbered door. "This is the records office," she said. "Until last week, it held every patient file from the war years. Now, those concerning Private Carroway and several others are gone." She opened the door and switched on a single oil lamp, its glow revealing empty shelves where manila folders should have been. I stepped forward and examined the floor. No sign of forced entry. Murdoch shook her head. The lock is undisturbed, but the key went missing 2 nights ago. I ran a gloved finger along the doorframe. No scratches, no splintered wood. A keyholder removed them deliberately. I turned to Hastings. We must interview the staff with access, the records clerk, the night orderly, and the matron. Murdoch's expression stiffened. About the matron. Her eyes darted down the corridor. I followed her gaze to a tall woman in a grey uniform, who approached on silent slippers. "This is Matron Sinclair," Murdoch introduced. "She has overseen these wards since the hospital opened." Sinclair's cool gaze assessed us. "I trust your visit is for the best interests of the patients, Monsieur Poirot?" I inclined my head. "Precisely, matron. We seek information about missing files and any circumstances you find unusual." She nodded curtly. "Follow me." She led us to her office, its desk piled with ledgers, medication schedules, and ledger books. I noted a polished key hanging from a brass hook. Behind her, a key identical to the one for the records office. Hastings's eyes flicked to it. Before I could speak, the records clerk, a nervous young man named Pemberton, was summoned. He entered clutching a small notebook. "Monsieur Poirot, this may help. I recorded every file removed for copying, and I noted that on April 3rd, a Mrs. Sinclair signed out Carraway's file for medical review." Matron Sinclair's composure faltered. "Fine, so I authorized it for consultation. I returned it promptly." She squared her shoulders. "Why would I abscond with it?" I produced a pencil sketch I had made of footprints in the forest clearing weeks before. The same prints Lucy found at the inn. "Private Carraway was stationed here after discharge," I explained. "His discharge papers went missing. His subsequent disappearance hints at foul play. We must know why the matron required his records." Sinclair's lips tightened. Carraway's case was delicate. He suffered from shell shock so severe that discharge seemed preferable to court-martial. His letters spoke of a traumatic incident in the field. Murdoch chimed in softly. The hospital agreed to erase his file to protect his family's honour, but certain gentlemen urged his silence, men of influence with connections in Whitehall. Her words echoed the scheme at the commission. Pattern emerged, powerful interests burying truth at any cost. I nodded thoughtfully. "Matron Sinclair, I ask you, did anyone else request Carraway's file after you returned it?" She hesitated, hands clenched. "Yes, Dr. Harrington took it 2 nights ago for review. He claimed urgent need. He has not returned." At that moment, the ward corridor lights flickered. Hastings and I exchanged alarmed looks. "Dr. Harrington!" Murdoch exclaimed. "He tends to the isolation ward. The door is secured from within." I strode toward the passage. "Captain, with Murdoch's keys." We hurried through the dim corridor to heavy double doors marked isolation. Murdoch produced a key and unlocked them. Inside, the ward was silent save for a single lamp by the far bed. There lay an empty cot, rumpled sheets stained faintly with dried blood. At the foot of the bed, Harrington's medical bag lay open, its contents scattered. On the floor, footprints, bare and dusty, led toward a side window, now cracked and ajar. I knelt and collected fragments of torn hospital ledger, the pages stained and smudged. Hastings examined the window latch. He fled, on foot, into the dusk. I inhaled the antiseptic odour. He risked exposure to hide the file. The missing records threatened to reveal more than Carraway's fate. Murdoch's face was pale but resolute. "We must pursue him before he disappears," Rose placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we shall, madam. For Private Carraway, and for justice itself, our little grey cells will not rest until the truth emerges." Outside, the morning sun pierced the ward windows, illuminating the path ahead. A chase through silent corridors and shadowed lanes toward a doctor who held the key to secrets buried in an inn and in a hospital alike. Chapter 18. Justice Restored at Dawn. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Captain Hastings, Nurse Murdoch and I emerged from the isolation ward, our breaths misting in the cool morning air. The chase through the hospital corridors had ended abruptly at the far window. The doctor's footprints led into the garden and onward towards the village beyond. I adjusted my bowler hat, eyes narrowed in determination. We pursue him now, before he vanishes like a phantom. We hurried across the dew-soaked lawn, Murdoch's lamp bobbing as she carried it in one hand. Hastings led the way, following the faint spoor in the soft earth. The gravel gave way to a rough lane flanked by hawthorn hedges, and at its end we spotted Dr. Harrington pausing beneath an ancient oak, the hospital ledger clutched to his chest. He turned at our approach, face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Monsieur Poirot," he rasped, voice hoarse, "I meant only to protect Private Carraway. His ordeal was too dreadful for print." I held up a gloved hand. "Speak freely, Doctor. We are here to learn the truth, not to punish the misguided." He exhaled, lowering the ledger. Carraway was found among the wreckage of his battalion's trenches, mind shattered by explosions and loss. The War Department classified him as insane, to spare his family shame and avoid scandal. I erased his records, then hid the files, believing mercy justified the deception. Murdoch stepped forward, eyes bright. "But why flee, Doctor? You risked your career and your freedom." He looked at the ledger, torn pages fluttering in the breeze. When Nurse Murdoch petitioned for transparency, I feared the truth would condemn not only Carraway, but the many soldiers whose records bore the same mark of shell shock. I believed the only way to protect them was to keep their files hidden away from callous inquiry. I studied him kindly. "Compassion without honesty is a double-edged scalpel, Doctor. In seeking to shield, you endangered Carraway himself. His fate, unknown to all, became a wound unhealed." I paused, turning my gaze to the ledger. "But now, thanks to your confession, we can restore what was lost." Hastings glanced at Nurse Murdoch. "Then where is Private Carraway?" The doctor's eyes flickered toward the hedgerow. "I brought him here, to a cottage where he could begin recovery, under an assumed name, Thomas Whetstone. I arranged for a former orderly to care for him. He lives but scarcely speaks of his past." Murdoch exhaled in relief. "Then we can reunite him with his family and vindicate his service." I nodded. "Yes, let us fetch him, that he may reclaim his identity." The doctor led the way down a side path toward a small, ivy-clad cottage. The door creaked as Murdoch knocked. Gently, a soft voice beckoned. Inside, A young man sat by the hearth, eyes vacant yet curious. He rose at our entrance, surrounding light revealing a gaunt but composed figure. "Thomas?" Murdoch whispered. His gaze fell upon her face. Recognition dawning. "Nurse Murdoch, you saved me." Tears came to her eyes. "And we have come to bring you home, Private Carroway." Hastings stepped forward, offering his hand. "I'm Captain Hastings, a friend of Monsieur Poirot's. We've traced every path so your family might know you live." Carroway's shoulders trembled, the weight of memories pressing upon him. I placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Monsieur Carroway, you have endured more than most. Now, with truth revealed, you may find peace." He nodded, tears shining, as Murdoch gently took his arm. Outside the dawn grew brighter, casting golden light upon the cottage. In that glow, a sense of renewal suffused us all. The wounded soldier reclaimed, his story no longer buried in secrecy. The return to the hospital was quiet, dignified. Carroway walked between Murdoch and Hastings, his steps uncertain yet resolute. Dr. Harrington followed, head bowed but eyes clear with purpose. At the records office, Matron Sinclair produced the restored files, and I oversaw the handover. These records belong to the past. May they now serve as testament to sacrifice, not shame. In the weeks that followed, the Commission published an official apology to Carroway and other soldiers affected, accompanied by a memorial fund for those with war-induced ailments. Nurse Murdoch was honoured for her perseverance, and Dr. Harrington, though disciplined, was commended for his eventual truthfulness. The Hanging Lantern Inn received a renewal of patronage, its reputation as a sanctuary reaffirmed. As Hastings and I prepared once more to depart Blackwood, Madame Dubois and her staff bade us farewell. Lucy pressed a small lantern-shaped pendant into my hand. "A reminder," she said softly, "that even the faintest light can guide the lost." I accepted it with gratitude, reflecting on the journey's full circle. From lantern's glow to courtroom's glare, from hidden files to public vindication, from personal mercy to collective reconciliation. I tipped my hat to Hastings. "Mon ami, our little grey cells have triumphed again." He grinned. "To another dawn of justice, Poirot." Beyond the inn's gates, the forest stirred with new life, promising that where truth shines, hope endures. And so, with our hearts lightened by restored honour and human dignity upheld, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stepped onto the road once more, guided by the unwavering flame of justice.